Greetings, house hunters, and welcome to another episode of House Hunter LA. Wah, 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 wah. Fancy graphics, music. I am your house hunter here, Mila Goldenberg, wearing the same shirt that I am in my business card photo. um, I am coming to you today from my house in Highland Park, my kitchen, which is about 8 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. I'm a real estate agent here in Los Angeles, and today I wanted to talk to you about escrows. This is a question I get from first-time home buyers mostly, but don't be embarrassed if you're not exactly sure what an escrow is. It's kind of a complicated time. It can be a little bit of a confusing period, so I wanted to demystify the escrow experience and talk to you about some of the contingencies that are most common in an escrow, so you can know and wow all your friends with what an escrow actually is. So basically what an escrow is, it is the period of time where ownership is transferred from the home seller to the home buyer. It's a very intense period of time. You have to have every day counts. There's a lot going on. Usually it's 30 days when there's a loan involved. I've done escrows as short as 2 weeks, which is when it's an all cash deal and there's no loan involved. Sometimes they can be as short as 7 days, or as long as 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, depending on what's going on in the escrow. But generally talking about an escrow is a 30-day period. You can assume three major contingencies. They are the inspection contingency, the loan contingency, and the appraisal contingency. And these all run concurrently with each other. As you're dealing with one contingency, you're also doing everything you need to address all the others. Like I said, it's a very intense period of time, usually for the buyer, because the buyer has to get a lot of stuff in order, particularly with their loan in the bank, squaring that away, paying for the appraisal, being there for all the inspectors and so forth. So those are generally the three contingencies that you can have with an escrow. Sometimes you can add a fourth where if your escrow is dependent on you selling your property first. A lot of people, you need to trade up, but you cannot do that until you get your money from the home sale of your existing property so that you funnel it into your new property. I just had a deal like that, 2 deals back to back. And that is, timing has to be right there. And that could be a fourth contingency to the escrow. And sometimes it's a little complicated. It's a better offer on the table. I usually won't take the offer with the fourth contingency. So you want to simplify it as much as possible. But, if they don't have a lot of offers, they'll accept that. And you can add other weird contingencies that you want. It could be limitless, although, like I said, you want a pretty simple, straightforward offer without a ton of contingencies because, sellers don't like to see that. It kind of complicates matters. They want a quick and easy home sale. That's why cash offers are so popular, because they get rid of the loan and appraisal contingency, at which point there is only one contingency, the inspection contingency, which we'll start with first. So the inspection contingency, what happens? So all the inspectors come out. Here comes everybody. You call out the plumber and the electrician and the termite guy and the roofer and the foundation guy. Sometimes you can get a geologist if there's, if the house is on a hillside, or, you get soil sample, you get testing for mold, potentially asbestos, lead. And, it's basically the time where you're really kicking the tires of the house and making sure that it's in good condition, good enough for you, or, figuring out what the problems are and if you want to deal with the problems. And a lot of times houses will fall out of escrow at this period because the buyer decides it's too much for me to deal with. I had that happen earlier this year. The house, during inspections, we found there was a lot of mold and a wet wall, and there was kind of like water intrusion into the house. There was a termite issue. So the buyer's like, it's a little too much for me to deal with right now. So, I think that was the right choice also. So we fell out of escrow with that house until we found the property that she ended up closing on. So that is the time. It's usually 17 days. You can shorten it to 14 days, 7 days. It could be, or you can request for more time if you need, if it looks kind of like a hairy situation. So with those inspections, I always get an estimate from the inspectors if possible. If not, I'll have a contractor come out and say, okay, this is the list of things that we found with the house. How much do you think everything is going to cost to repair? At which point I put together a request for repairs that I submit to the listing agent, who talks to the seller and says, these are the things that are wrong with the house. This is how much the estimates are to repair them. And at that point, the seller decides. And it can go any direction. I always tell my buyers this: be prepared for anything. The seller can say, take it or leave it. I'm not going to pay for any of these repairs. Or the seller can say, I'm going to do all the repairs myself, which you kind of don't want to do because they're on their way out. So they might not be quite as invested into making sure all the repairs are, done up to maybe a standard of a new home buyer. Or they could just say, well, split the difference with me. I'll give you some of the repair money toward your closing costs. That's usually what happens. They end up giving a little bit. Not always all, but some actually give all. I mean, it really depends on the seller and their own personality to, give some monies toward the closing costs of the buyer. At which point, once you get all that worked out, the inspections are done, the request for repairs, the estimates are in, you work out the deal with the listing agent and their seller, you remove the inspection contingency. At that point, the buyer cannot rely on any problems from the inspections to jump out of the escrow and to cancel the escrow. However, if the buyer, through the course of inspections, like I said, decides it's too much, they can jump out and get their deposit back. And the deposit is usually 3% of the purchase price. That's wired into an escrow account within 3 days of having an offer accepted. So at that point, the buyer said, no, too much. Get your money back, no risk, no foul, at which point the seller continues to market the house, hoping for a new buyer, and the buyer, goes on and finds ultimately the house that works for them more. So also during that time, you have the appraisal and loan running all concurrently. Like I said, loan appraisal, usually around 21 days. I like to shorten appraisal down to 14 or 17 if I can. Makes for a stronger offer, especially in this competitive market. And the appraisal contingency is basically the bank sending out an appraiser to determine how much the home is worth against the purchase price, how much you've offered to pay for the house. And sometimes appraisals come in low. So when you hear a low appraisal, I had this happen also this year, where the bank sent an appraiser who said the house appraised I think it was $30,000 less than the purchase price, which got kind of bumped up through a bit of a bidding war in order to secure the house for the buyer. They ended up, having to decide basically whether they were going to come up with this $30,000 difference out of pocket, because once we got the low appraisal, the natural thing is to go back, talk to the seller and say, hey, the appraisal came in low. Can you give us, can you take the purchase price down to the appraised value? Seller said no, which is very common in this hot housing market, because they had an offer and backup position, also very common in this housing market. So they knew that if it fell out of escrow with us, they had somebody willing to buy the house, and they could have worked out with them like, hey, you're going to take the property at the purchase price we agreed on instead of the appraised price. And, sellers have a lot of leverage in this market. So basically the buyer had to decide at that point if she wanted the house and to pay the difference out of pocket, which she ended up doing. So we got a little bit of request for repairs, so it kind of helped to offset some of the expenses that come with it. But again, depending on the market, this is a very common thing that happens. So once that was sorted out, we knew what the purchase price was going to be, and that she's comfortable paying out of pocket for the difference. We removed the appraisal contingency, and the last thing was loan. So the loan is basically the bank qualifying the borrower. They ask you everything under the sun. You have to get every piece of paperwork, every weird transfer on your account, every strange charge, every stray 1099. You're being asked to provide material. You're being asked to write declarations, kind of explain things away. So the bank determines at that point whether you're a qualified borrower. And this is usually, you get a conditional approval before you get final approval, but you want to hear that the final approval is there before you remove the loan contingency, just in case something comes up at the last minute. Usually it doesn't. If you get a pre-approval from the bank, for the most part, I've never had this happen yet where the loan isn't approved at the last minute, and usually they don't approve it if there's some evidence of fraud. So, you can't lie on any of your paperwork. You want to make sure that everything is, upfront, and the bank qualifies you, knows that you're a worthy borrower, that you're a good risk for them to take, at which point they approve the loan. They're going to let you have that money, and they wire it into the escrow account to make sure the the purchase goes through. And at that point, you remove all the contingencies. That's about 21 days left of the 30-day escrow period. And the last 10 days, I like to call kind of hurry up and wait. It's a time where all the stray stuff, all the straggling stuff gets done. Like I have to complete my file, so I have to make sure all the paperwork is signed. You know, the seller and listing agents doing that, the borrower is also doing that. Kind of, you know, change of utilities are going on. Like all sorts of little kind of stray stuff is happening during that process, where you're basically waiting for a call at the very end from the city of Los Angeles, in our case, saying that there has been a confirmation of recording, and that basically means that the city knows at that point that the property has changed hands. There is a new buyer of the property who is now the owner, and the city knows that, at which point there's like kind of a cutoff once you get that confirmation of reporting. Like everything that happens to the house at that point moving forward is the buyer's responsibility, because they're now the owner. The seller, you know, is absolved of the responsibility. That's usually the best day because it's closing day, and I get to go over with the keys to, the property to give them to the buyer. It's always very exciting. It's very relief. All the stress that comes with it, all the, you know, ruckus is worthwhile, and that's a very happy moment for, you know, my buyers and me. It makes it all worthwhile. So, and at that point, escrow ends. And it's over, and you know, buyer moves into their house, at which point they can enjoy and live in, and those are always good days, closing days. So that is in escrow. Hopefully that helped you. Let me know if there's any questions about it. If anything is still kind of confusing, I am around to, you know, work with buyers and sellers in the greater LA area. My website is HousehunterLA, where you can find all my contact information. Please subscribe to this page, give it some likes, and let me know if this was helpful and what other questions you have for me. And thank you so much for joining, and I hope to talk to you again real soon. Thanks.